We all have challenges in life: sadness, broken relationships, anger, bullying, grief, and isolation. But there is hope. Together, we can learn how to bring back joy, re engage with life, restore relationships, and to be alone without being lonely. Welcome to Psychology Talks.
And today we have Pam Standridge with us, and she is a licensed marriage and family therapist. So you're here to talk with us about relationships today. So tell us about what some of the important aspects of a relationship are.
And I come from a cognitive behavioral therapy approach, and that just means that I believe that how you think is how you feel, and how you feel is how you act. And so a lot of times I work with people on how they're communicating, what they're thinking, how to change some of that so that it goes better than sometimes we experience.
Absolutely.
So one of the things is listening. Listening is not the first thing that we think about when we're thinking about communicating. We think about talking. We think about trying to get our point across. But one of the most valuable things that we can do is listen well. So I work with people on reflective listening. Basically, reflective listening is reflecting what you hear underneath of what they're saying. Like, so you feel this way. I hear that.
If I were to have a conversation with my husband or a friend, and they weren't happy with something, and they were, or even if maybe not even that they weren't happy with something, but we were just talking about everyday stuff. And if I were, looking at my phone while they're talking to me, or they're saying something and then I say something totally off topic, that's an indication that I'm not doing active listening.
That's true. Yes.
But by saying something back to the person that
clarifies.
Yeah,
clarifies
that's a great word to use. Yeah.
Yes.
So that clarifies what I just heard them say, but in my own words.
Yes.
Then I'm doing reflective listening.
Right. And it makes the other person feel heard. It makes them feel valued. And that's what's really important in communicating, is making someone feel that they're heard, that they're valued.
Yeah. So it's about taking the focus off of yourself and putting it back on the other person.
Right.
That's a wonderful tip. So were there other things that you feel like are really important for people in managing a relationship?
Well, conflict is something that comes up in relationship. And there are some tips that I use from John Gottman, who is a researcher in marriage and family. And he talks about the 4 horsemen. And these are things that he has shown will lead to divorce. They've been proven. He has researched all of this out, and there's 4 things that we want to avoid in relationship. One of those things is criticism. And contempt. Stonewalling. And defensiveness.
Okay. So criticism, contempt, stonewalling, and
defensiveness.
Okay. So what is criticism?
Criticism is verbally attacking someone's character. And so you might just say, you never think about how it affects me. So contempt is a little bit further than that, and it's more like sarcasm. It can be eye-rolling, maybe mocking. So contempt is taking that criticism a little bit further. And then defensiveness is what's going to come up anytime we use a you statement. You always, you never do the dishes until too late. And so that's bringing up defensiveness in someone. And the way, and then the next thing that we might do is stonewall, where these hurts have come up enough times that we just decide we're not going to talk. We're going to withdraw. We're going to go in our own little corner. So those are the 4 things that we need to stay away from: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling.
Maybe it'd be helpful if we unpacked that just a little bit more to help people understand what that might look like in the relationship. I think you gave some great examples. And you said that it was more about attacking their character. So maybe I'm not even, maybe if I'm doing the you, it bothers me when you, that you said that's more like the stonewalling? Is that?
No, that's more like the criticism.
Okay, that's still the criticism. Okay, so those can
kind
both
of
be criticism.
attacking their character. Yeah.
Okay, so anytime you start with those you statements, the when you do this, or I don't like when you do that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you chew too loudly. That bothers me.
Yes.
I had a friend once who that was her thing. She didn't like people chewing loud.
Right.
So that was one thing that she was really bothered by, and so she would say things like that.
Sure.
And that could be hurtful to other people. So that's an example maybe of criticism.
Yes,
for
sure.
And sometimes when we're in relationships, we end up focusing on those little things, even though there's something big underneath it.
Right. And then if you were to go to contempt with that, you might say, you chew like that, and it sounds like a cow, or you take it a step you take it a step up.
Okay.
And you're trying to really hurt that person by what you're doing.
Okay. So going to contempt, there's more of an intention behind it to actually hurt the person.
Yes.
Okay. So that's when you're picking out something that you recognize as something, or they've told you is something that hurts them or bothers them. And then you use that information to kind of dig at them a little bit. Is that?
Sure. Okay. And maybe just saying like, you're lazy.
Okay.
That's definitely a character thing.
Okay. And then, so that gives us criticism and contempt. And so now we're at defensiveness. Defensiveness is probably where a lot of people automatically go to, is if you're feeling attacked.
Sure.
That's a very natural thing to then want to defend. And so in this instance, though, we're not defending physically, we're defending verbally.
Yes.
So what happens in defensiveness?
Well, I think it just escalates. It escalates things because it's really a way to blame. It really is to take the blame off of you and put the blame on someone else.
Okay.
So, yeah, defensiveness doesn't move us through the conflict well.
Right. So then it goes from, I don't like how you chew, to then the other person saying something like maybe, well, the only reason it happens that way is because you sit too close to me. You wouldn't hear me if maybe you were sitting a little further away and giving me the space I need.
Right.
Would that be an example?
Sure.
Okay. So then it's taken up another notch where now there's anger.
Yes.
And so the person says something, at first maybe not trying to get a response, or maybe they are if it's in that contempt stage. And it seems like maybe with these stages, maybe it starts out innocently enough, or could, but then as problems build in the relationship, then it probably goes much quicker. So you're going through these different horsemen very, very quickly.
Sure.
So.
And I think stonewalling comes after maybe a lot of attempts.
Okay.
And when that one comment that is about your character comes, and it's come several times, then your natural reaction might be to just shut down. Okay. Just remove your emotions out of it and decide it's not worth this conversation.
Right. And that's probably not happening early in the relationship. That's probably happening after there's been a lot of conflict in history there.
Yes.
Right.
This is true.
Yeah. So a lot of these things have probably built up over time. And so maybe the relationship started out very loving.
Yes.
But it ended, or is heading towards ending.
Right. And I think what happens is we tend to start focusing on negative. We start thinking about us. We think about what we need. And when we do that, we're not really caring for the other person very well. Right. And so oftentimes if there's a lot of negativity around the relationship, I suggest that you work on positive.
Okay.
Work on the positive. And one of the techniques that I use for that is called the GLAD technique.
Okay.
It comes from positive psychology,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really a focus on positives. So to kind of get these, get yourself out of these places where everything's gone so negative and there's contempt and criticism, defensiveness and stonewalling, maybe go into, we're just going to work on being thankful. We're going to work on gratitude. So it's an acronym, GLAD, for gratitude.
Mm-hmm.
What are some things I'm thankful for today?
Okay.
What are some things that I have learned today?
Okay.
And then A is for accomplishment. What's something that you accomplished today? It doesn't even have to be something big. You can focus on, I got the bed made today, so that was a good thing.
Okay.
And then D, something delightful, like maybe just noticing your surroundings, noticing being out in the nature, the birds are chirping, something that was delightful. Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm hearing in that is that we want to focus on ourselves and what's creating in us this conflict with this other person, but we also, maybe when we're using that GLAD technique, so we're applying it to ourselves and our day, but maybe we're also applying it to the other person.
Yes, for sure.
So
yeah, I actually encourage couples to do that together.
Yeah.
Work on the GLAD technique so that there's a little bit more of the positivity coming out. It's really easy to focus on negative.
Right. So what am I grateful for in this person?
Mm-hmm.
So instead of looking for all the different things that maybe drive me nuts about them, what I'm looking for and really focusing on are the things that I'm really grateful for with them.
Yes.
And what was L again?
Something I've learned today.
Learned. Okay. So what have I learned about this person today?
Yes.
So you're really looking for new things in the relationship that can maybe cause some repair.
Yes, for sure.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And so that can be a focus of the conversation. So if you notice that they're wearing something new, or that they're doing something in a different way, or maybe they did something that they don't normally do around the house.
Yes.
Or if it's a friend, maybe it's you're noticing something that you haven't noticed before. And so you make that a focus of the conversation. So like you said earlier about turning the focus away from you and onto them in that reflective listening piece.
Right.
So you're taking that as an opportunity to say, I see this about you and I value it. And so I'm going to ask you about it.
Yes.
So for example, just earlier today, my husband had the day off today, and so he got up and he started cleaning. And so, maybe
it's always nice,
right? But maybe that would be a place that I could, use the GLAD to be really grateful for that, and to say, I am so thankful for you doing that for me. It meant that I could focus on other things and didn't have to do that this morning.
It's
and I didn't even have to ask you to do that. And so I really appreciate that in you. I really appreciate that you did that for me this morning.
Right.
So that would be an example of using those two aspects of the GLAD.
Right.
And so the A was appreciate. Is that right?
Accomplishment.
Accomplishment. Oh, I had it wrong. Okay, so accomplishment. So if we use that same example, maybe then, maybe he would say, well, thanks. Or, I was glad to do it. Or, maybe it'd say, well, I really wanted to be doing something else.
Yes.
And if you have a lot of conflict in the relationship, maybe that's where it would go at first, right?
Right.
Is that kind of negative aspect of it. So then if that's where it was at in the relationship, and they said, yeah, I really wanted to be doing something else, but I did that instead. So maybe you can say, well, I really appreciated that you did that. And you doing that really allowed me to get my work done in this other portion of our life, or it allowed me to have a little extra time with our children, or it allowed me to to get a little extra sleep, and I've been really sleep deprived. And so it just made me very thankful that you're in my life and that you did that.
Right. That's true.
Okay. And then what was the D again?
D was delight, something that has delighted you today. So these are like conversations that I feel that couples or friends can have. You can even have that with your teenager. You can, you know, be on places where, you know, your conversation or your relationship has gone into kind of a negative tone where there's a lot of conflict. If you can change some of the ways that you're focusing, and this technique actually allows you to do that.
I like that. So glad. So we're grateful, we're
Learning,
we're accomplishing, and we're delighting.
yes.
Okay. I can see how that comes out of positive psychology.
Yeah. And you can imagine that that's going to make you feel better. I mean, when you're focusing on those things,
right?
You know, it's going to make you feel better. The whole atmosphere of the home or the relationship is going to change because of that.
Absolutely. Personally, I know I feel much better about someone or the relationship with that person if when I interact with them, what I hear is something good instead of something negative. So that's part of what I'm hearing you say is that in the relationships, we have the power on our side. We can't control what the other person does, but on our side, we have the power to then change that negative construct that we're using in our language with that person to something more positive that's going to elicit a better response.
For sure. Yes.
Okay.
And in those times where we might have to talk about some really hard things, I mean, that is normal everyday life, whether it's with a friend or with a parent or a child or in a marriage. We do have to talk about hard things.
Right.
So I really work with people on pretty simple thing where you just say I statements versus you statements. And maybe a lot of people have heard about that, but we don't use it very often. Yeah. We always say you first. You should have done this, or you make me feel. And it's so much better. It's so much better received if you can say, I feel really bad when you talk to me like that. I feel like I need more time with you instead of you never spend any time with me.
Oh, that's a great example. Yeah. And I'm sure that's one that's often brought up in therapy and treatment with your patients.
Yeah.
And so what are some other aspects of dealing with conflict in a relationship that we can talk about today?
So along with the GLAD technique, there's a few things that we can do to combat those 4 horsemen because they're surely going to bring death to our relationship. If we continue with those 4 things, it's not going to be successful.
Okay.
So there are some things that we learn to replace those. Like one of those is a gentle startup. Okay. So instead of a criticism of something that's annoying to you, maybe you have a gentle startup where you take kind of responsibility and say, I feel like you're really not listening to me. Instead of maybe saying, you just are a bad listener. You're not listening to me. Say, I feel like I'm not being listened to.
I feel like I'm not being heard.
Yeah, I feel like I'm not being heard.
Okay.
For sure. And another thing that we can do is kind of cultivate a culture of appreciation, which kind of ties in with that GLAD technique that we were talking about. But it's appreciating what they've already done, along with maybe communicating something that is not being done.
Okay.
Like normally you do the dishes, but tonight you didn't really do the dishes, and it really bothers me. Maybe could you take more time and make sure that you're paying attention to that?
Or maybe asking why. You know, normally I noticed that you do the dishes, but you didn't tonight, and it made me curious if something was going on.
Yeah.
Is there a way that I can help?
Right. And I think sometimes we just take it personally and like, oh, you're just lazy, or wow, it was an expectation, that you had, that sometimes we don't communicate. That again is an area where we can improve. Really, talking about what we expect from one another instead of like expecting it in our head and them to read our minds.
Right. So recognizing that they don't know, the other person doesn't know.
That's true.
They don't know what we're thinking. And unless we express it in a verbal way, they might misinterpret our cues.
Yes. One of the other things, so in order to not be defensive, if we can take responsibility, that's going to go a long ways.
Okay.
Like sometimes part of what they are saying to us is really true. Well, most times.
Yeah.
Something is true. So if we just take responsibility and say, oh yeah, I didn't do the dishes, I'm really sorry about that, and I'll pay closer attention to that.
Okay.
Instead of defending yourself and saying, well, I'm always doing the dishes and I just got tired of doing the dishes today.
Okay. So when you're the person being criticized, or you feel like you're being criticized, recognizing that there might be something going on with the other person and not taking it personally, but then reflecting back to them a way of saying that, yes, what they noticed is true.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, you're absolutely right. I didn't do that.
Right.
And maybe apologizing for it.
Sure. That can always go a long way.
Can always go a long way. Or maybe that would be a time to say or express what was happening for you without necessarily having the other person ask.
Right.
So, I just had a really long day today. You're right, I didn't. I'm sorry. I had a really long day today and I wasn't feeling well. And so I just wanted to take a little rest.
Yeah. So in trying to combat the stonewalling, which is kind of that fourth horseman, which gets us to a place of, nobody's talking, and a very lonely place as well. What you can do is notice that that's happening and take a few minutes away. Say, okay, can we have 15 or 20 minutes apart so that I can think through this?
Okay.
And sometimes we need that in order to deal with that hurt that's come up in that conversation. And when we do that, it's with the intent that we are going to self-soothe.
Okay.
And then come back to that. It's not good to let stonewalling go on for days.
Okay.
It's definitely not going to resolve the conflict.
Yeah. So I hear in that a few things. So first I hear that we need to recognize what our own needs are.
Yes.
So if we're starting to have conflict in a relationship or in a conversation even, that's the time to be a little bit self-reflective and say, okay, right now I can feel myself getting angry. What do I need to tamp that down? Or what do I need to deal with that? Or maybe even, what is that anger about? Is it really at this person and what they've just said? Or is it about something that happened earlier today that I've been ruminating on? So what I need right now is to step away for a second.
Right.
And there's probably lots of different ways that can be done.
Yes,
So,
for sure.
Just dropping your stuff and storming out probably isn't a good one, right?
Sometimes happens though, right?
Yeah, it does sometimes happen in relationships. So maybe a better way to do that would be to say, let the person know. So like we were talking about a moment ago with them reading our minds, they don't know what we're thinking. So if we storm out, they don't know that we're planning on coming back. So maybe if we just express that and say, I need to take a break for a minute.
That's exactly it.
And then I'll come back and we can finish our conversation.
Right.
But right now I'm feeling really anxious, or I'm starting to, I need to deal with my own emotions for just a minute.
Right.
And then I'll be ready to come back and talk some more.
Right.
Okay. I think I really like that analogy of the four horsemen. I think, what better way, I think most people would have heard that term before and would associate that with apocalypse.
Yes.
And I think even the word apocalypse, I think brings that image of death of something.
Right.
And that's really kind of what you and Gottman are saying with this, right?
Right.
That it's bringing about the death of a relationship if it's not managed.
That's right.
And I think what I also hear in that is hope,
Yes.
that there is a way to come back from that place in a relationship and to improve things so you can restore it.
Right. And that, that first step is really just acknowledging that there's an issue.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of the just the first step into going into a counseling situation with someone is that those people have finally just recognizing that there's something that they need to change.
Right.
And we can't change anything until we're willing to say, hey, I need to change.
Yeah.
It's just, I tell people a lot of times, it's like, when you want to buy a car and you find the car that you want, like you want to buy a SUV or something, all of a sudden, every car is an SUV, right?
Yeah, you start noticing them.
Exactly. Right. So it's the same with, issues in relationships that we need to, pay attention to. If we start by acknowledging, oh, this is a problem, or this is an area where I can change, we'll start seeing it more frequently. We'll have the ability to change it, whereas we wouldn't before.
So then we start noticing it in ourselves.
That's right.
So not necessarily looking for it in the other person, but noticing it in ourselves, because we can't change the other person. We can only change ourselves. So I think that's a great technique that you've brought to us. So when we talk about things like restoration, it seems like that's entirely possible.
It is.
And so you mentioned therapy a minute ago. And so using therapy as a way of attaining that restoration. So having someone else that's brought in really as a facilitator.
Right.
To help with those communication pieces, to look objectively as an outside person of the relationship, to see where those communication breakdowns are happening and being able to point them out and give those techniques and tips. We live in a country that's a huge country, and there's lots of places where it's so rural that there aren't therapists.
Right.
Or, maybe they don't have someone in a therapy role that they can go to. And so do you have thoughts or ideas about how people can get some of that help or make those changes in their relationship if they don't have a therapist in their area, or maybe they can't afford to go to one?
Sure. So a good resource is John Gottman's book, 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. It has these principles in it and more that we've been talking about. And so that's a great way to get some help for relationship or marriage without necessarily going to therapy.
Okay. And it also has some exercises in it that people could do.
Yes, it does. It has some communication, fun things, learning to build up your love bank.
Okay.
Learning to ask questions. Maybe you don't know them as well as you think you know them. And so there's some fun stuff in there.
Okay, good. And then something that I can think of is, maybe people could go see a pastor. So a lot of churches do pastoral care. And so through that can help with relationships and conflict in relationships. Do you know if there are any internet resources that people might use?
Well, I feel like you can find just about anything on the internet. So, you can YouTube marriage therapy or relationship, conflict, any of those things. You're going to find some helps right there. It's all about really realizing that you have an issue and something that you want to improve, and really finding a way to solve that problem.
Well, Pam, thank you so much for coming on today and for talking with us about how to make a relationship work. I think this is going to be really invaluable information for so many people out there that are struggling in their relationships. And thank you for joining us. It has been a pleasure to have you here today.